Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be the next video on environmental science and specifically looking at predation in our second part of our video series here. Let's get started on this next video. Now, when we go through and look at certain types of prey, what is a prey and what are some of the adaptations that we're going to see? Well, a prey is an animal that's hunted and killed by another animal for food. And we see all of these different prey that have different adaptations. The zebra have these stripes here. This crab has this spotted back to kind of allow it to blend in with the environment. This cuttlefish here can change its shape and colors. And then we can also see on plants, they go through and develop thorns that make it more difficult for them to get eaten. But how do prey go through and get these adaptations, and how do they go through and interact with their environment, and what types of things are driving these? This is what we're going to be going through and looking at. Now, before we jump into this, we want to review our limiting factor. A limiting factor limits the growth or development of an organism, population, or process. So if we have our prey and our predator population, remember they are interlaced and interconnected here. As our prey population increases, what we're going to see is also an increase in our predator population. They're going to go through and follow each other. And subsequently, if we see a decrease in our prey population, the predator population will follow. Now, as we go through and look at these limiting factors, remember there's going to be biotic limiting factors like the quantity and size of the population of prey, but also abiotic factors, non-living factors. Those are going to be the size of the environment, the weather, natural disasters, etc. So as we're going through and thinking about this and thinking about how these adaptations occur, we want to be thinking about limiting factors. Now, if we're going through and looking at this, natural selection is going to lead to the adaptations that predator and prey populations go through and see. And we reviewed this with our giraffe necks. As the giraffe necks went through and got larger over time, this is due to natural selection. The giraffes with the tallest necks were the most fit for survival. And when we think about natural selection when we're talking about prey will lead to three specific scenarios. The first scenario that we're going to go through and look at is aposematic coloration. And this is going to signal to other organisms that these individuals are toxic. In the middle here, we're going to see camouflage. Camouflage is another adaptation that allows organisms, specifically prey, to hide from other organisms and blend in with their environment. And then lastly here, we're going to look at Batesian mimicry. And this is going to be prey that go through and mimic other toxic organisms. So everything that we've learned about natural selection, everything that we learned about limiting factors are going to drive these three scenarios. Now, the first and most easy one for us to go through and look at is camouflage. If we look in this picture, we can see here's this owl in this middle of this nook of this tree. Now, in some cases, an owl is going to be a predator, but it can also be attacked by other organisms. And camouflage is used to disguise organisms as per their surroundings to protect them from predators, but it's also going to allow predators to also attack prey. We can also see here's a lizard that goes through and adapts to its environment to blend in. But if we're thinking about our zebras, why did the zebras have these black and white stripes? Well, in some cases, camouflage is going to be beneficial for that environment. However, when we're thinking about different adaptations and techniques that organisms have, they can either stick out from their environment. We'll look at that with aposematic coloration and Batesian mimicry. But in the case of zebras, instead of going through and camouflaging just themselves into their environment, they're trying to camouflage themselves as a herd. If you're a lion going through and trying to attack a herd of zebras, these stripes are going to make it difficult for you to pick out one particular zebra to go through and prey upon. So what we want to be thinking about here is camouflage doesn't necessarily have to blend in with the environment. In the case of zebras, at least one of the hypotheses that we have is it's allowing them to create a blended herd. This is the same exact concept when we go through and talk about fish in schooling populations there. So we want to be thinking, remember, camouflage, we're disguising the organisms, they're blending in with their environment or their herd or their school to go through and prevent that attack from that predator. Now, aposematic coloration is going to be a little bit different. Instead of going through and trying to blend in with the environment, these organisms are going to want to kind of stick out of their environment. Aposematic coloration is conspicuous coloration or markings of an animal serving to warn off predators. We see this with our poison dart frogs, our monarch butterflies, and we're also going to see this with our spotted mandarin fish here. What these bright and distinct colorations are going to indicate to a predator is that this organism is toxic, and if consumed, it is going to be deadly. So this is something totally different. It's a different technique that these prey are going to use, and a different adaptation that they've gone through and developed over millions of years to warn off predators. By having these bright, distinct colorations, over time, predator populations will realize that these organisms are toxic and deadly if consumed. Now, something similar to aposematic coloration is Batesian mimicry, where a harmless species has evolved to imitate the warning signals of a harmful species. So on the left here we have our coral snake, and on the right here we have our king snake. One of these is venomous and the other is not. It's very difficult for us to go through and tell. If I'm walking through the jungle and I see one of these two snakes from walking through the woods, I'm not going to test or touch either of them because they have this coloration pattern and I don't know which one is venomous and non-venomous here. Now in the case of this specific example, we see the coral snake is venomous. And what this king snake is doing is it's mimicking the color pattern of that coral snake. King snake is actually non-venomous, but it has this striped pattern that makes it appear to be venomous. So Batesian mimicry is something that over time, as organisms go through and evolve, we see that they imitate these other venomous organisms and they go through and can prevent predation via this process. Now, an interesting organism is the cuttlefish, and the cuttlefish can actually use all three of these processes together. It can go through and appear to be aposematic, and it can go through and kind of use that Batesian mimicry or that aposematic coloration to indicate that it might be venomous. But it can also go through and change its shape and camouflage and change the color patterns within its actual body to go through and camouflage itself. So this organism is highly evolved, and millions of years of this cuttlefish have taken it to a place where it can kind of use all three of these techniques to prevent it from being preyed upon. This is also going to play a really important. This is also going to give the cuttlefish a really interesting advantage because it's also going to allow it to go through and be an apex predator. It can go through and use all of these different skills and all of these different adaptations to go through and easily go through and attack prey. So if we're thinking about the cuttlefish, it's just an interesting concept for us to go through and look at because it's using all three of these techniques and all three of these adaptations in one organism. So if we're going through and reviewing our three scenarios here, natural selection is going to lead to three scenarios for our prey. The first scenario is going to be this aposematic coloration, and this is going to indicate that the organism is toxic if it is consumed. So the goal for that prey is to never get eaten by having these bright colors on it. Now, contrary to this, we have this Batesian mimicry, and this is going to be mimicking a aposematic organism. So by mimicking a toxic species, this is also going to prevent that organism from getting eaten. Now, lastly here, we're going to have camouflage. And camouflage is going to go through and hide these prey from predators and never allow them to get eaten in this fashion. So three scenarios here: aposematic coloration, Batesian mimicry, and camouflage. This is what natural selection leads to when we're going through and talking about our prey. Alright, so this is going to be the end of the video. Did you learn? Well, did you learn a couple of things? Did you learn what prey are? Did you learn about how limiting factors affect prey? And then lastly here, what are the three types of adaptations that prey use to prevent predation? This is going to be the end of the video. I will see you all in class tomorrow.